On the day Dakota buried her father, they erased her name from the will. That night, her stepmother offered her a roof and a bed, as long as she scrubbed the floors, and they forced her to marry a billionaire who rejected her on their wedding night. "I would never lie with you," he said. Yet 5 years later, when she walked into that courtroom and defeated him, he realized the mistake he had made. Because never is a word destiny loves to disprove. If you believe in second chances, stay until the end. And if you enjoy this story, leave your like and subscribe to the channel. The rain fell heavily over the Hampstead Cemetery that November afternoon, turning the ground into dark mud and the sky into a gray curtain that seemed endless. Dakota Lautner stood before the open grave, watching her father's oak coffin descend slowly into the wet earth. She was 26 years old, dressed in a simple black dress, and her brown eyes were dry, not because she did not feel pain. Over the last 3 days, she had cried so much that no tears remained, only a frozen emptiness in her chest, as if something inside her had died with George Lautner. Around the grave, there were only a few people, former employees from her father's company, some neighbors who still remembered the time when the Lautner family was respected, and her, the stepmother. Rachel Dallas stood a few meters away, impeccable in a designer black dress that had probably cost more than Dakota would earn in 6 months of work. Beside her, Isabel, Rachel's 21-year-old daughter, was far more interested in her phone screen than in the priest's words. Dakota knew those two women well enough to understand they were not there out of grief. They were counting the minutes until the will was read. The priest finished the final words, a rushed blessing swallowed by the noise of the rain. Then Rachel approached, her heels sinking slightly into the soaked grass, and there was no hug, no comfort, only that cold voice, sharp like a blade. "The lawyer is waiting. For us in an hour. Do not be late." Dakota only nodded because what else could she do? Argue, scream, what would be the point? Her father had been a hard-working man, a man who had built a transport company from nothing, brick by brick, contract by contract. They were not wealthy, but they lived well. A comfortable home in Notting Hill, security, dignity. Until 3 years earlier, widowed and lonely, George met Rachel on a business trip. 6 months later, they were married. Everything changed. The house began to smell of expensive perfume and falsehood. Isabel moved in with the arrogance of someone who always had everything without deserving any of it, and Dakota, little by little, was pushed to the margins of her own life. In the lawyer's office in Kensington, the truth struck Dakota like lightning. The middle-aged man adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and read in a monotone voice, as stipulated in the will of Mr. George Lautner, the entire inheritance, including the company, properties, and bank accounts, goes to his wife, Rachel Dallas Lautner. Dakota felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. The walls seemed to tilt. She blinked, trying to process what she had just heard. "How is that possible?" Her voice came out shaky, almost inaudible. "My father always said that." "Your father changed the will 6 months ago," the lawyer interrupted, avoiding her eyes. "Everything is legal and registered. There is nothing to contest." Rachel slowly crossed her legs, displaying that rehearsed elegance of someone who always knew exactly what she wanted. A nearly invisible smile played on her red-painted lips. "Darling, your father was very sick in his last months. He wanted to make sure I was protected. You understand, do you not? You are so young. You have your whole life ahead of you to build your own path." The words tasted like sweetened poison, every syllable carefully chosen to wound without appearing. Cruel. Dakota looked at Isabel, who did not even try to hide the triumphant smile. There was victory in that young face, and Dakota realized with painful clarity that everything had been planned. All of it, from the very beginning. The house. She tried to keep her voice steady, clinging to a last thread of hope. "At least the house where I grew up." "It is also part of the inheritance," Rachel replied, examining her perfectly manicured nails as if discussing the weather. "Do not worry, darling. You may continue living there. For now." That "for now" echoed in the room like a death sentence. Dakota left stumbling, unsure how she reached the street. The rain still fell, yet she did not feel it anymore. 2 weeks passed. 2 weeks in which Dakota tried to find any way to overturn that decision, but every lawyer she consulted said the same thing. The will was legitimate. There was nothing she could do. Then on a Thursday morning, while she prepared coffee in the kitchen of the house that was no longer hers, Rachel entered with Isabel at her side. "We need to talk," Rachel said, pouring herself a cup of the coffee Dakota had just made. Dakota's stomach twisted, though she remained silent. "Listen," Rachel continued, using that almost maternal tone that made everything even worse. "Maintaining this house is very expensive. Taxes, repairs, everything increasing. Isabel and I have decided we are going to sell." Dakota's heart plunged. "Sell? But this house, it is mine," Rachel cut in, firm, her eyes cold despite the smile. "Before you become dramatic, I have a proposal." The silence that followed was suffocating. Dakota could barely breathe. "You may continue to live here. As staff." The word dropped like a bomb. Dakota repeated it, stunned. "Staff? Housekeeper, to be more specific," Isabel added, with pure satisfaction in her youthful and cruel voice. "After all, you have no money, no place to go, and frankly, you need to earn a living somehow, do you not?" Rachel lifted her hand as though she was offering the greatest favor in the world. "I will be generous. Room, meals, and a small salary. All you must do is keep the house clean, cook, take care of our needs. A fair opportunity considering your situation." Dakota wanted to scream. She wanted to throw the coffee cup into Rachel's face and walk out with her head high. When she looked around, though, at the kitchen where her mother used to bake cakes on Sundays, at the window overlooking the garden where she played as a child, she realized she had no choice. She had no money, no one. The small savings she had would barely pay 2 months of rent anywhere decent in London. "Fine," she whispered, and the words felt like swallowing glass. That was how the hell began. Days turned into a routine of humiliation meticulously orchestrated. Dakota woke at 5 every morning to prepare Rachel and Isabel's breakfast. She cleaned. She washed. She ironed. She cooked. They treated her as if she were invisible unless they wanted to demand or criticize something. "These sheets do not smell the way I like," Isabel complained, throwing everything on the floor. "Wash them again." "The food is bland," Rachel said, pushing the plate away with disdain. "Can you not do anything right?" Dakota endured in silence. At night, locked in the small maid's room at the back of the house that once was hers, she allowed a few tears to fall. In the morning, she stood up again, because she had to, because she had nowhere else to go. 3 months passed like that, 3 months in which Dakota felt pieces of herself die, 1 per day, until she barely recognized the woman in the mirror. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, Rachel entered the kitchen with a different expression. There was calculation in her eyes. "Dakota, sit." She obeyed, puzzled. Rachel never asked her to sit. "You need to look for another job. I am selling the house. For real this time. I cannot pay for your living here anymore." Dakota's world trembled once again. "But you said—" "I said you could stay for now." Rachel cut her off, cold. "Now is over." She slid a newspaper across the table. "There are job ads here. I suggest you start searching. You have 1 week." That night, Dakota flipped through the newspaper with trembling hands, sitting on the edge of the narrow maid's bed that was now all she had in the world. The weak lamp flickered, and she had to squint to read the classifieds. Most of the jobs required experience she did not have, degrees she never finished, references she could not give without exposing her own humiliation. Her father fell ill when she was in her 2nd year of business administration at the University of Westminster. She withdrew from school to take care of him. She cooked his meals, managed his medication, stayed awake on nights when he groaned in pain. She never returned to college. She never finished anything. She turned another page, tired eyes sliding over offers for telemarketing, reception, deliveries. Then she saw it. A small square in the lower corner of the page, almost hidden between larger and flashier ads. "Housekeeper wanted for mansion in Mayfair. Experience desirable. Good pay." It was not a dream job. It was an escape. Air when she was drowning. The next morning, Dakota called the number with her heart pounding in her chest. A female voice answered, gentle. "Good morning. Good morning," Dakota replied, trying to sound confident. "My name is Dakota Lautner. I am calling about the job opening." "Wonderful, dear. Could you come for an interview this afternoon? Let us say 3 o'clock?" Yes, I can. The woman gave the address, and when Dakota wrote it down on the back of an old envelope, she realized it was one of the most expensive areas in London, Mayfair, where billionaires lived behind iron gates and gardens that looked like they belonged in magazines. At 2:30 that afternoon, Dakota stood before the cracked bathroom mirror, trying to tame the brown hair that insisted on falling across her face. She wore the only decent outfit she still owned, black trousers thinning at the knees and a simple white blouse she had ironed 3 times to remove every crease. No makeup, no jewelry, only herself, raw and vulnerable, trying to look like someone who deserved a chance. The bus left her 3 blocks from the mansion. Dakota walked slowly, her worn-out shoes tapping against the wet pavement. When she reached the gate, she stopped. She simply stopped and stared. The property was massive. Tall black wrought iron gates, imposing and elegant. Perfectly symmetrical gardens as if every leaf had been placed by an artist. A marble fountain in the center, crystal water arching flawlessly into the air. It was not just a house. It was a monument. A reminder that some people lived in. A reality entirely different from her own. She pressed the doorbell and a uniformed man answered through the intercom. Yes? Dakota Lautner. I have an interview at 3. The gate opened with a soft electronic sound, and Dakota walked along a path of white stones to the main door. There, waiting for her, stood a woman of about 60, gray hair tied in an impeccable bun, a genuine smile and blue eyes that seemed to see more than they should. Dakota? The woman offered her hand. I'm Maggie, the housekeeper. Please come in. The inside of the mansion stole Dakota's breath. Polished marble reflecting the light of crystal chandeliers, wide staircases draped in Persian rugs, artwork on the walls she had only ever seen in books. She felt completely out of place, as if she had stepped into a museum and someone might discover she did not belong and ask her to leave. Maggie led her into a smaller office, cozier, with bookshelves and a lit fireplace. Please sit, dear. I will ask a few basic questions. Nothing too formal. The interview was surprisingly simple. Maggie asked about experience, and Dakota mentioned the last months, carefully omitting the humiliating details. She spoke of caring for her sick father, of knowing how to cook, clean, and manage a household. Her voice was quiet, but steady. Maggie watched her closely, and there was something in that gaze that seemed to understand more than the words said. You seem like a good-hearted young woman, Maggie said at last, her head tilting softly. The job is yours if you want it. Dakota blinked, barely believing it. I accept. Thank you so much. We offer housing on the property, 3 meals a day, and a salary well above the average. You will have Sundays off and 1 day during the week. Could you start Monday morning? Dakota could hardly speak, her throat tightening with emotion. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. When she left the mansion that afternoon for the first time in days, something inside her stirred. It was not happiness, not yet, but it felt like hope. On Monday morning, Dakota arrived carrying an old leather suitcase that had belonged to her father. Inside, everything she still owned in the world. Some worn clothes, a framed photo of George, and a recipe book that belonged to her mother, the pages yellowed and stained from use. Rachel did not even say goodbye. She only watched from the living room window as Dakota walked away, probably already calculating how much she would make from selling the house. Maggie greeted her with a warm smile and led her through the corridors to the staff quarters, a separate wing from the main house but surprisingly comfortable. The room was simple yet clean. A single bed with white linens, a dark wooden closet, a small window overlooking the gardens. Dakota set the suitcase down and sat on the bed, feeling the firm, comfortable mattress. For the first time in 3 months, she would have a space that belonged to her. Rest today, organize your things, Maggie said kindly. Tomorrow we start early. Mr. Burke usually leaves for the office at 7 sharp. He likes to have breakfast before that. Burke? Dakota asked, realizing she did not even know her employer's name. Kellan Burke, the owner of the mansion. Maggie lowered her voice slightly, as if sharing a secret. He is an intense man, dear. A billionaire. Chief Executive Officer of Burke Incorporations. Do not worry, though. He barely notices us. Lives locked in his office or traveling for business. You will hardly see him. That night, Dakota could not sleep. Relief over having a roof over her head mixed with anxiety about the unknown. Lying in that bed, staring at the ceiling, she wondered what it would be like to work for a billionaire, whether he would be cruel like Rachel, whether he would treat her as invisible, or whether he would simply leave her in peace. Next morning at 5:30, Dakota was already up. She showered quickly, pinned her hair into a simple bun, and put on the uniform Maggie had left hanging in the closet. A gray dress, discreet, nothing extravagant, but respectable. When she went down to the main kitchen, Maggie was already there preparing coffee, and the rich aroma filled the room. "Good morning, dear. Punctual. I like that." Maggie pointed toward the coffee maker. "Mr. Burke likes his coffee strong, no sugar. He always drinks it in his office. Second floor, last door on the left. You can take it to him." Dakota picked up the silver tray with the fine porcelain cup, a small pitcher of milk in case he changed his mind, and made her way up the marble stairs. Her footsteps echoed softly in the morning silence. The mansion felt suspended in time, solemn, almost reverent. When she reached the office door, she drew a deep breath and knocked lightly. "Come in." The voice was deep, firm, the kind that does not need effort to command authority. Dakota opened the door, and what she saw made her pause for a fraction of a second. Kellan Burke sat behind a massive dark wood desk, eyes fixed on the computer screen. He appeared to be around 34, 35. Black hair perfectly slicked back, a chiseled jaw as if carved by a sculptor, broad shoulders beneath a flawless suit even at such an early hour. There was a sort of magnetism about him that filled the space without a single word spoken. Yet what caught Dakota's attention most were his eyes. When he finally lifted them to her, they were a deep blue, penetrating, intelligent. But there was something tired there too, as if he carried the weight of 1,000 invisible responsibilities. "Good morning, sir," Dakota said, keeping her voice steady as she placed the tray on the desk. "Your coffee." Kellan watched her for a moment. It was not an invasive or disrespectful stare. It was analytical, as though he was evaluating every detail, cataloging information. "Are you new?" "Yes, sir, I started today. My name is Dakota." He nodded, already turning his attention back to the screen. "Thank you." It was a clear dismissal. Dakota left the office, closing the door softly behind her. But something about that brief encounter lingered. His presence, the way he seemed completely absorbed in his work, as if nothing else in the world mattered, as if he were utterly alone, even surrounded by people. The following days fell into a predictable rhythm. Dakota worked hard, but the environment was infinitely better than at Rachel's house. Maggie was kind, almost maternal. The other employees treated her with respect, as an equal. And Kellan, well, Kellan barely noticed she existed. Every morning she brought his coffee. He thanked her with a nod without lifting his eyes. Sometimes when she walked past the corridor, she would hear him on the phone, talking about million-dollar contracts, mergers, acquisitions. It was a world she didn't understand, yet she couldn't help but admire the determination in that voice. One afternoon, while folding clothes in the laundry room, Maggie remarked, "Mr. Burke isn't a man of many words, but he's fair, pays well, never causes trouble. He's just lonely." "Lonely?" Dakota repeated, intrigued. "He works 16, 17 hours a day, rarely goes to social events, and when he does, he always comes back alone." Maggie sighed, folding a sheet with practiced precision. "I've seen plenty of women try to win him over. Models, businesswomen, heiresses. He never seems interested. It's as if he built a wall around his heart." Dakota didn't reply, but she tucked that piece of information somewhere in her mind. There was something sad about it. A man who had everything, and yet nothing. 3 weeks later, everything changed. It was a Friday night, and Dakota was in the first-floor library organizing books that Kellan rarely touched. The room smelled of old leather and polished wood, and there was something comforting about that silence. She ran her fingers along the spines of the books, reading titles in English, French, and German, when she heard voices coming from the entry hall. Female voices, loud ones, accompanied by laughter that echoed through the marble walls. Curious, Dakota moved quietly toward the half-open door and peeked through. 2 stunning women stood there. One, blonde, wearing a tight red dress that seemed painted on, impossibly high heels, flawless makeup. The other, a brunette with long hair, equally perfect, laughing at something Dakota hadn't caught. And between them, Kellan. He looked tolerant, but not exactly interested. Polite, but distant. "Kellan, you can't stay here working on a night like this," the blonde said, practically hanging on his arm. "Come on, just one drink, only one." Kellan sighed, clearly exhausted. "I have an important meeting on Monday. I need to prepare." The brunette pouted dramatically. "You always say that, work, work, work. When are you going to live a little?" "Maybe another time." The women kept trying for a few more minutes, attempting to seduce him with promises of parties, dinners, encounters. But eventually they gave up, leaving business cards with phone numbers and empty promises to call. When the door finally closed, Kellan stood in the hall for a long moment, running hand over his face in pure exhaustion. That was when he noticed Dakota standing at the threshold of the library, half hidden behind the door. "I'm sorry, sir," she said quickly, feeling her face grow warm. "I was just organizing the books. I didn't mean to intrude." Kellan looked at her, truly looked for the first time since she had started working there, and there was something different in his gaze now. It wasn't just observation, it was curiosity, maybe even interest. "Dakota, right?" She was surprised he remembered her name. "Yes, sir." "How long have you been working here?" 3 weeks. He took a few steps toward her, his hands in his pockets. His tie was loosened, the first buttons of his shirt undone. He looked human like that, less untouchable. "Maggie speaks highly of you, says you're efficient, discreet." "I do my best, sir." Kellan studied her face for a long moment, and Dakota felt her heart quicken without knowing exactly why. There was an intensity in that gaze that made her feel exposed, but not uncomfortable. It was as if he were trying to read something written between the lines of her soul. "You're different from the others," he finally said. "Sir?" He shook his head slightly, as if pushing away a thought. "Nothing. Carry on with your work." But as Dakota returned to the books, she felt his eyes linger on her for a few more seconds. She heard his footsteps climb the stairs, slow, heavy, and something about that moment hung in the air, like a question neither of them yet knew how to ask. That night, lying in bed, Dakota couldn't stop thinking about the way he had looked at her, as if he'd seen something no one else could, something she herself hadn't known was there. On Friday, she didn't see him at all. Maggie mentioned he had left early for a meeting and probably wouldn't return until late. But on Saturday morning, while Dakota was in the garden helping the gardener trim the rose bushes, she heard the deep voice behind her. "Dakota." She turned, startled, and there he was. Kellan Burke, for the first time dressed casually, a white linen shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, dark jeans, hair slightly tousled as if he'd just woken up. He looked younger that way, less intimidating, almost approachable. "Mr. Burke," she said, wiping her hands on her apron and straightening up. "I need to speak with you." He paused. "In my office, please." Dakota's heart pounded. Had she done something wrong? Was she going to be dismissed? She followed him through the silent corridors, her mind racing with possibilities. When he closed the office door behind them and gestured for her to sit, Dakota obeyed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Kellan leaned back against the desk, facing her, arms crossed. He stayed silent for so long she almost asked if something was wrong. Then he spoke. "I'm going to make you an unusual proposal, and I need you to listen until the end before responding." Dakota only nodded, her mouth dry. "I need a wife." The words fell like a bomb in the silence of that office. Dakota blinked, certain she had misheard. She must have misheard. "Sir?" Kellan sighed, running a hand through his hair in a gesture she had never seen from him before. There was something almost vulnerable about it, as though he were about to reveal a secret he had carried too long. "Let me explain. My company is undergoing a crucial merger with a European group. The investors are conservative, traditional, the kind who believe in family, stability, old-fashioned values. They want to do business with a man who's serious, married, family-oriented, not with a bachelor surrounded by tabloid scandals." "But you don't have scandals, sir," Dakota said, confused. "No, but the press loves to invent them. Every time I'm photographed with a woman, it becomes a headline. They create romances that don't exist, break up relationships that never began, invent betrayals, reconciliations, dramas." He stepped away from the desk, walking toward the window that overlooked the gardens. The morning light traced his profile, highlighting the sharp jawline, the tension in his shoulders. I need to change that image. I need a wife who conveys seriousness, stability, someone the investors can look at and think, yes, that's a man we can trust. Dakota couldn't believe what she was hearing. It was absurd, unreal. And you're offering me that role? Kellan turned to her, and there was something in his blue eyes she couldn't decipher. You're different from every woman I've ever met. You don't look at me like I'm a bank account. You don't try to impress me. You don't use strategic necklines or calculated smiles. You're discreet, intelligent. He paused, choosing his words carefully. There's something genuine about you, Dakota. Something real. And that's exactly what I need. The cameras will see it. The investors will believe it. The silence between them was dense, heavy, filled with things unsaid. Dakota felt her breath catch. Kellan continued, stepping closer, his voice lower now, almost intimate. It would be a contract. 2 years. Enough time for the merger to settle and my image to stabilize. During that period, you'd be my wife only on paper, only to the outside world. No romantic involvement. Separate bedrooms. Separate lives inside this house. You'd have your freedom. I'd have mine. Dakota felt as though she were floating outside her own body, as if she were watching the conversation through fogged glass. And what would I gain from this? Her voice came out steadier than she expected. Kellan smiled, just a faint curve at the corner of his lips. A credit card with no limit. Clothes, jewelry, cars, whatever you need to look the part of a Burke. A monthly salary of £30,000 deposited into an account in your name. Even after the contract ends. He leaned slightly forward, his eyes fixed on hers. And at the end of 2 years, an amicable, discreet divorce. No scandals. You keep everything you've earned during the period, plus a financial compensation of £2 million. Dakota felt the air leave her lungs. £2 million. It was more money than she would ever see in her entire life. It was freedom. It was a new beginning. It was everything. But it was also a lie. Pretending. Selling. Something she wasn't even sure she possessed. And if I refuse? Dakota asked, her voice trembling. Kellan shrugged. Then you keep working here as usual, and I'll find someone else. No hard feelings. No consequences. He paused. But before you decide, let me tell you something. Maggie told me a little about your situation. I know you lost your father. I know you were disinherited. I know you've endured humiliations no one should ever go through. His eyes softened, and for the first time, Dakota saw what looked like genuine humanity there. This is your chance to rebuild your life, Dakota. To never depend on anyone again. To take back control. It's madness, Dakota thought. Absurd. But then she thought of the alternative. Of going back to the streets, looking for unstable jobs, living on the edge, always vulnerable, always at the mercy of people like Rachel. And the offer started to make a strange, painful kind of sense. May I think about it? Of course. But I'll need your answer by tomorrow morning. The merger will be announced next week, and I need to be prepared. Dakota spent the rest of the day wandering through the mansion like a ghost. She sat in the gardens, walked down the long corridors, stood before mirrors trying to recognize the woman staring back at her. Her mind wouldn't stop. It spun, again and again. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, a chance to never be humiliated again, to have money, to have power. But it was also a massive lie, pretending to be someone's wife, living a farce for 2 years, smiling for cameras, playing a role. Then she thought of Rachel, of the way she had been treated like trash, of Isabel laughing while she scrubbed the floor, of how she had been left with nothing when she should have inherited the fruit of her father's life's work. And something inside her hardened. Maybe it was time to think about herself, to accept help, even if it came wrapped in deception, to play the game instead of being played. On Monday morning, when she brought Kellan his coffee, Dakota took a deep breath before speaking. He was standing by the window, his back to her, and turned when he heard the door open. I accept, she said, her voice steady and resolute. Kellan raised his eyebrows, clearly surprised. Are you sure? Yes, but on one condition. What condition? I want everything in writing. A contract signed by lawyers with every clause you mentioned. Every detail, every penny, all on paper. For the first time, Dakota saw what might have been a genuine smile touch his lips. It wasn't wide, it wasn't exuberant, but it was there. Of course, my attorney will prepare everything today. You'll have time to read, review, and request changes if needed. He extended his hand. Then we have an agreement. Dakota looked at that hand for a long moment. It was the hand of a billionaire, the hand of someone who lived in a world completely different from hers. And she was about to take that hand and step into that world, even if only for 2 years, even if it was all pretend. She took his hand, firm, cool, formal. We have an agreement. And so, with a handshake that lasted barely 3 seconds, Dakota became the future wife of one of the wealthiest men in England. The days that followed were a whirlwind of transformation. Lawyers came and went from the mansion carrying piles of documents that Dakota read with obsessive attention. Every clause, every word. She didn't trust anyone, not anymore. Life had already taught her that lesson in the cruelest way possible. The contract was cold, meticulous, almost surgical in its precision. 2 years of marriage without romantic involvement. Separate bedrooms, public appearances as needed. A credit card with no limit for clothing and everything required to sustain the image of Kellan Burke's wife. £30,000 deposited monthly into her personal account. And at the end, after a discreet divorce, £2 million. When Dakota signed her name on the last page, she felt as though she were selling a part of herself, but also as if she were purchasing her own future freedom. The wedding will be in 2 weeks, Kellan informed her, placing the documents away. Something intimate. Only essential people. I'll need you to invite someone from your family. The investors expect to see that. Dakota's stomach twisted. Family. The word sounded like a bitter joke. My father passed away, she said quietly. And my stepmother. We don't get along. But she's the only family you have. Her and my half-sister. Then invite them. It needs to look real. That night, with trembling hands, Dakota dialed the number she had sworn never to use again. Hello? Rachel's voice was sharp, impatient. It's me, Dakota. There was a long pause. Dakota, what a surprise. I'm calling to invite you to my wedding. Silence. Then a short, incredulous laugh. Your wedding, you? With who? With Kellan Burke. More silence. When Rachel finally spoke again, her voice was different, unsteady. Kellan Burke? The billionaire? Yes. The wedding is in 2 weeks, Saturday at 4 in the afternoon. But how? We met. We fell in love, Dakota lied, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. When she hung up, a small flame of satisfaction burned quietly in her chest. The days flew by. Kellan hired a team that transformed Dakota. Mackenzie, the head stylist, worked like an artist sculpting marble. You have an excellent bone structure, she said, circling Dakota. We're just going to reveal the woman who's already there. They cut her hair into soft, modern layers. Elegant clothes arrived in boxes, lessons on etiquette and posture. Dakota looked at the mirror and barely recognized herself. She looked like a refined version of who she had once been, a well-crafted illusion. The wedding gown was simple yet devastating. Italian white satin, a discreet neckline, a short, elegant train. When Dakota tried it on for the first time, something in her chest ached. For a fleeting moment, she forgot it was all a lie. The night before the wedding, Kellan called her out to the garden. Tomorrow we'll have to look convincing, he said, hands in his pockets. People will be watching every gesture. I know. He stepped closer, so close that Dakota could smell his cologne. Woody, subtle. May I test something? What? To see if we work. Before she could ask, Kellan placed one hand on her waist, the other gently lifted her chin. If I kiss you tomorrow, will you flinch? Dakota's heartbeat quickened. No. Are you sure? Yes. He leaned in slowly. When his lips touched hers, it was soft, technical, a rehearsal kiss. But when he pulled away, something different lingered in the air, something Dakota couldn't name. Tomorrow it'll work, he said, his voice slightly hoarse. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear. Dakota woke early, her stomach in knots. Maggie helped her into the gown, her eyes glistening with tears. You look beautiful, my dear. When Dakota descended into the garden, musicians were playing softly. White flowers covered everything, 40 impeccably dressed guests. Dakota recognized faces from magazines, shareholders, businessmen, and in the third row, Rachel and Isabel. The shock on Rachel's face was almost comical, mouth slightly open, eyes wide. Isabel looked just as stunned. In the front rows, 3 striking women stared at Dakota with curiosity and something darker. Former lovers of Kellan, no doubt. The music began. Dakota walked alone down the aisle of flowers. There was no father to give her away, but she kept her head high, her shoulders steady. When her eyes met Kellan's at the altar, something flickered across his face. Surprise, admiration. The ceremony was brief, traditional. The officiant read the solemn vows. "Do you, Kellan Burke, take Dakota Lautner as your wife?" "I do." "And you, Dakota Lautner, do you take Kellan Burke as your husband?" She looked at him, at that stranger who was offering her a way out. "I do." "You may kiss the bride?" Kellan leaned in. The kiss was slow, deep, as if he wanted to prove something to everyone watching. When they pulled apart, there was applause. But Dakota noticed the stares, cold. Ones from his former lovers, stunned and furious from Rachel. The reception took place in the grand hall. Waiters moved gracefully among guests with trays of French champagne. Dakota stood beside Kellan, greeting people, when Rachel approached. "Dakota, darling, what a wonderful surprise." She kissed the air beside her stepdaughter's cheek. "You never told us you were seeing someone so important." It all happened very quickly. "But how did you two meet?" Kellan stepped in, placing a hand around Dakota's waist. "She worked here, and I realized I had found something rare." The words sounded far too sincere. Dakota turned to him, startled. Rachel gave a short, brittle laugh. "How romantic! Cinderella and the prince." Then she leaned in, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "But tell me, Dakota, does he know you used to be my maid? That you scrubbed my bathrooms?" The blood in Dakota's veins froze. Before she could reply, Rachel stepped back, raising her voice so everyone could hear. "From cleaning bathrooms to England's first lady of society. What a rise." The hall fell silent. All eyes turned to her. Isabel laughed cruelly. "It's true. She was our housemaid." Kellan's former lovers chuckled among themselves. A few investors exchanged shocked glances. Dakota looked at Kellan, hoping, praying, he would defend her, but he lowered his head for a moment. Just a second, and in that second, she saw shame flicker in his eyes. Then something shifted. Kellan lifted his head, his gaze turning to steel. He turned toward Rachel with an expression that made the woman physically recoil. "Mrs. Burke," he said, his voice like iron, "worked honestly to earn her living after people without integrity stole her inheritance. That isn't shame, it's honor." He looked around the room. "And anyone who has a problem with that may leave my house. Now." No one moved. Rachel went pale. Kellan pulled Dakota closer, his arm, protective around her. "My wife is the most dignified woman in this room, and if anyone else tries to humiliate her, they'll deal with me." Silence. Then, a single pair of hands began to clap. Another followed, and soon, the entire hall was applauding. Dakota turned to Kellan, her eyes glistening with tears she refused to shed. He had defended her, publicly, without hesitation. Something inside her shifted, something dangerous. Later that night, when most of the guests had left, Kellan found her in the library. "Thank you," she said softly, "for standing up for me. There's no need to thank me. It was the right thing to do. But you did it even though this is just a contract." He looked at her for a long moment. "Maybe it's not just a contract to me." Before Dakota could ask what he meant, Kellan walked away. 2 days later, they left for the honeymoon. Kellan explained that it was essential for appearances. The investors expected photos, proof of a real marriage. They flew to Santorini, a private villa overlooking the Aegean Sea, white and blue, so beautiful it didn't seem real. 2 separate suites, Kellan said upon arrival. As agreed. Dakota nodded, trying to ignore the faint sting of disappointment. No, it couldn't be disappointment. The first few days were strange. They had breakfast together on the terrace, walked the stone streets, dined at seaside restaurants. To any observer, they looked like a couple deeply in love. But at night, they went to separate rooms, and Dakota lay awake, listening to the sound of the waves, wondering why it bothered her so much. On the third night, they were having dinner at the villa. Greek wine, exquisite food, candles flickering softly. The sea breeze carried the scent of salt and flowers. "You're doing well," Kellan said. "With all of this, the appearances. It's easier than I thought. Sometimes I almost forget it's all pretend." Something flickered across his face too quickly for her to identify. "Kellan," she said, gathering her courage. "May I ask you something?" "Of course. Why have you never married for real? Before all of this?" He stayed silent for so long that she thought he wouldn't answer. "Because I've never met anyone who made me want to," he finally said. "Every woman I've known wanted the money, the status, the name. No one ever saw me beyond that. And now, with this fake marriage," he looked at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her heart race. "Now, I'm not sure what's real and what's pretend anymore." The moment stretched between them, heavy, charged. Dakota felt something stir deep within her, something that shouldn't be there. On the fifth night, after a particularly romantic dinner where Kellan had made her laugh with childhood stories, they returned to the villa. Dakota had drunk more wine than she should have. She felt bold, reckless. When they reached the door instead, going to her room, she stood there looking at him. "Kellan, Dakota, you've been drinking, you should rest." "I didn't drink that much." She took a step closer. "I was just thinking, we're married, legally, and we're here, in this beautiful place, and..." She didn't finish the sentence. She simply leaned in and kissed him. For a second, just 1 second, Kellan kissed her back. His hands moved to her waist, pulling her closer. The kiss deepened, became urgent, real, but then he pulled away abruptly as if he had been burned. "No!" Dakota blinked, confused. "What? This can't happen." His voice was hard, cold, completely different from moments before. "But we have a contract, Dakota. No romantic involvement. No, this." He gestured between them. "That was the agreement." "I know, but I thought, after today, the way you..." "It was an act." His words came out sharp. "For the cameras. For the tourists who might recognize us. Nothing more." Dakota felt as though she had been slapped. "I see." "Dakota. No, you're right, it was the wine." She stepped back. "Good night." She turned and went to her room, closing the door before he could see the tears. On the other side, Kellan stood in the hallway for long minutes, his hand clenched into a fist, fighting everything he felt. He wanted her. God, how he wanted her. But he couldn't. Not like this. Not when everything between them was built on lies and contracts. She deserved more. She deserved something real, even if it meant pushing her away. The following days were tense. Dakota kept her distance, polite but cold. Kellan tried to talk, but she answered with single words. On their last night in Santorini, he found her on the terrace watching the sunset. "Dakota, about that night, you don't have to explain. I understood perfectly." "No, you didn't." "I did. We're just a contract, a performance. Nothing that happens between us is real." She looked him straight in the eyes. "That's what you said, isn't it?" Kellan wanted to scream that it wasn't, that everything he felt was real, that he had defended her at the party not out of duty, but because he couldn't bear to see her hurt, that every moment with her made him wonder if he'd be able to let her go when the 2 years were over. But instead he said, "That's what we agreed on, yes?" Dakota nodded and turned back to the sea. "Then let's keep it that way." They returned to London, to the mansion, to separate rooms and silent dinners, to a life of appearances that began to feel heavier by the day. And Dakota, locked in her room at night, realized with growing horror that she was falling in love with the husband who saw her only as a business arrangement. The months that followed were a quiet kind of torture. Dakota and Kellan returned from Santorini to a meticulously constructed routine of polite indifference. He left early for the office. She spent her days exploring London, visiting museums, reading in the mansion's library. At night, they dined together only when there were social commitments. Otherwise, each ate in their own room. Maggie watched everything with worried eyes. "You two barely speak," she remarked one morning while Dakota had breakfast alone. "That's not healthy, dear. We're just adjusting," Dakota lied. But the truth was far more painful. She was falling in love, and he was building higher walls every day. 2 weeks after their return, there was a charity dinner. Dakota wore an emerald green gown Mackenzie had chosen. When she descended the stairs, she saw Kellan waiting in the hall. He stopped mid-motion while fixing his tie, his gaze locking on her. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice rough. "Thank you." Dakota kept her tone neutral, though her heart was racing. At the event, they played their roles perfectly. Kellan introduced her as my wife, with a pride that seemed genuine. They danced a slow waltz, their bodies close, and Dakota could feel his warmth through the fabric of his suit. "You're doing well," he murmured near her ear. "Everyone believes it. That's what I'm here for, isn't it? To be convincing." Something in his eyes darkened. "Dakota, can we just finish the dance?" He said nothing more, but his hand at her waist tightened slightly, as if he didn't want to let her go. 3 months after the wedding, Dakota began volunteering at a foundation run by one of Maggie's friends, helping women in vulnerable situations. The work fulfilled her. It gave her purpose beyond being the decorative wife of a billionaire. Kellan didn't comment at first, but one night, when she came home late from a foundation meeting, she found him waiting in the living room. "Where were you?" "At the foundation. The meeting ran late." "You could have told me. I was worried." Dakota blinked, surprised. "Worried? You're my wife. Even if it's my responsibility to know where you are." Responsibility. The word came out bitter. "Of course. Well, next time I'll let your secretary know. She can update your schedule." She moved past him, but Kellan gently took her arm. "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean, Kellan?" Dakota turned, eyes shining. "Because sometimes you act like you care, and then you push me away. And I can't take this game anymore." His eyes searched her face. For a moment, it seemed he was about to say something important, but then he released her arm. "Good night, Dakota." She climbed the stairs to her room, tears burning her eyes. 6 months after the wedding, there was a business trip to Paris. Kellan needed to close an important deal with French investors, and they expected to meet his wife. Paris was devastatingly romantic. The Eiffel Tower glittered at night. Cozy cafes filled the corners. The Seine reflected the city lights. Dakota tried not to think about what the trip could have been if their marriage were real. At the dinner with the investors, an older man named Laurent remarked, "You two are a charming couple. It's rare to see genuine love these days." "We're lucky," Kellan replied, taking Dakota's hand across the table. "She's everything to me." The words sounded so sincere that Dakota almost believed them. Almost. Later, at the hotel, they walked together to their adjoining suites. "You were perfect tonight," Kellan said. Laurent was impressed. "That's what I'm here for." "Dakota, please don't what? Don't remember that this is fake? Don't care when you say I'm everything to you and then barely speak to me the next day?" "It's complicated." "No, it's simple. We have a contract. You made that very clear in Santorini." She opened the door to her suite. "Good night, Kellan." She closed the door before he could answer, and on the other side leaned against the wood, letting the tears finally fall. 8 months after the wedding, Dakota realized she could no longer ignore the truth. She was completely in love with Kellan, and it was an unrequited love that was destroying her piece by piece. She tried to create emotional distance, but every time he smiled at her a certain way, every time he protected her at social events, every small gesture of care fed that foolish hope that maybe, just maybe, he felt something too. Until the night everything shattered. It was a Friday, 10 months after the wedding. Dakota had returned from a particularly hard day at the foundation. One of the women they helped had lost custody of her children, and Dakota had spent hours comforting her, feeling utterly powerless. When she got home, she found Kellan in the study. He looked exhausted, shoulders tense, tie loosened. "Are you all right?" she asked from the doorway. He looked up, surprised. "Rough day. Complicated negotiations." "Me too." She entered, sitting in the chair across from his desk. "Sometimes I feel so useless. I wish I could do more." "You do a lot. Maggie told me about your work at the foundation. You're changing lives." "Not enough." Kellan watched her for a long moment. Then he stood, circled the desk, and did something unexpected. He reached out his hand. "Come on. I need some air." They went out to the garden. The night was clear, stars visible despite the London lights. They sat on the bench where they had once rehearsed their wedding kiss. and Dakota felt the heavy weight of irony. Kellan began, then stopped. These past months have been difficult. Yes, you're a good person, better than I ever deserved to meet. Kellan, what are you trying to say? He looked at her and there was something in his eyes she had never seen before. Fear, that I'm sorry, for keeping you at a distance, for making this harder than it should be. Why do you do it? Her voice came out as a whisper. Sometimes I feel like there's something real between us, but then you pull away. Because it has to be that way. That's what we agreed. And what if I don't want it to be that way anymore? The silence that followed was deafening. Kellan looked at her and for a moment Dakota saw hope, desire, something that mirrored what she felt. But then he stood, his back stiff. We still have 1 year and 2 months left on the contract. After that, you'll be free. What if I don't want to be free? What if I want? Don't say it. His voice was sharp. Don't make this harder. Dakota rose, anger finally overpowering sorrow. Harder? You think this isn't already hard? I wake up every day in this house. I have breakfast watching you read the paper. I go to events hanging from your arm. I sleep 3 doors away from you. And I pretend I don't care. I pretend my heart doesn't break a little more every day. Dakota, no, let me finish. Tears streamed down her face now, but she didn't care. I fell in love with you, Kellan. I know I shouldn't have. I know it's against the contract, but it happened. And you push me away every time we get close. Kellan stayed silent for so long that Dakota thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally did, each word was a knife. I'm sorry you feel that way, but I can't return it. This marriage is a business arrangement. That's all it ever was. And when it's over, we'll go our separate ways. You don't feel anything. Her voice broke, fragile and raw. He looked her straight in the eyes and lied. Lied because he was afraid. Lied because he didn't know how to handle what he really felt. No, I feel respect, admiration. He paused, then delivered the final blow. But I would never sleep with you, Dakota. I could never see you that way. I feel no attraction, no love. I never have. The words came out cold, calculated, cruel, and even as he said them, Kellan felt as if he were tearing his own heart out. Every syllable was a lie that scorched his throat, because the truth was the opposite. The truth was that he wanted her so badly it hurt, that he woke up every night thinking of her just 3 doors away, that every time he saw her walk down those stairs, the air left his lungs. But he couldn't say that. He couldn't be vulnerable, not when she would probably leave him once the contract ended anyway. So he lied, and watched her soul die in those brown eyes. Dakota felt the ground fall away beneath her feet. The words echoed in her head like funeral bells. I would never sleep with you. Never. Never. It was worse than hearing he didn't love her. It was rejection in its purest form. It wasn't just that he didn't love her, he didn't even want her, didn't even see her as a woman. I understand, she whispered, barely audible. Dakota, please don't. No. She stepped back as he tried to approach. You were clear. Perfectly clear. Thank you for your honesty. She turned to go inside but stopped at the door without looking back. Tears slid silently down her face, but her voice was steady. One thing. That night in Santorini when I kissed you, you kissed me back. For a second, but you did. So maybe you're lying to me. She paused. Or maybe you're lying to yourself. I don't know which is worse. And with that, she walked inside, leaving Kellan alone in the garden. He stood there for long minutes, his fists clenched so tightly that his nails dug into his palms. What had he done? Why had he said it? The cruelest words he could have chosen. Words he knew would destroy her. But it was too late. The damage was done. And the truth he would never admit aloud, was that he would sleep with her in a heartbeat, that he dreamed about it, that his desire for her consumed him, that he was completely, irreversibly in love. But fear was stronger than courage, and now he would have to live with the consequences. 2 weeks later, there was another event, an important dinner with the European investors who had finally signed the deal. It was the moment Kellan had waited for, the moment that justified the entire fake marriage. Dakota wore a silver gown, pinned her hair into an elegant bun, and descended the stairs with a flawlessly practiced smile. If Kellan wanted a decorative wife, that was exactly what he would have. At the event, she was impeccable. She spoke with the investors in the basic French she had learned. She laughed at their jokes. She touched Kellan's arm with calculated affection. But when they returned home that night, she went straight to a room without saying goodnight. Kellan stood in the hallway, staring at the closed door, feeling that he had lost something important, but he didn't know how to get it back. 1 year after the wedding, Dakota finally broke. It was a rainy Tuesday. She had spent the day at the EO Foundation, helping a woman find a job, helping her rebuild her life, and she realized with painful clarity that she was doing for others what she couldn't do for herself. She was living a lie, in love with a man who saw her as a pawn in his corporate chess game, trapped in a house that would never be a home, dying a little more each day. That night, she waited for Kellan to come home from the office. When he walked in, he found her sitting in the living room, suitcases packed by her side. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice tense. "I'm leaving." "What? But the contract." "I don't care about the contract." She stood facing him. "You can keep the money, keep everything. I just want my freedom." "Dakota, you can't just—" "I can, and I will. Because if I stay here one more day, I'll lose myself completely." Kellan took a step toward her. "If this is about that night in the garden, It's not just about that night. It's about every day, about waking up in love with someone who made it very clear he'll never love me back, about pretending to be happy when I'm dying inside. I never asked you to fall in love with me." The words came out cruel, defensive, and Dakota felt the last flicker of hope die. "No, you only asked me to pretend to be your wife, pretend to smile, pretend to be happy. And I did. I did everything you asked. But I can't keep pretending that my heart isn't shattered." She grabbed the suitcases. Kellan didn't. "Move? Where will you go?" "That doesn't matter. You have what you wanted, the merger is done, the investors are happy. You can just say it didn't work out. No one will question it." Dakota walked toward the door, stopped, without looking back. "And for the record, I never regretted falling in love with you. I only regret staying so long, waiting for you to love me back." The door closed softly. Kellan stood frozen in the silence of the mansion, listening to the sound of the car, driving away. And only then, when it was too late, did he allow the truth to hit him. He loved her. He had always loved her. But he had pushed her away because he was afraid. Afraid she would leave once the contract ended. Afraid her love was only gratitude. Afraid he wasn't enough. And now she was gone. And he was left alone with his stupid, cowardly pride. Kellan walked up to the room that had been hers. It was untouched, as if she might return at any moment. On the bed, there was an envelope. Inside, a note written in delicate handwriting. "Kellan, I realized I can't live in a world of pretending. You deserve someone who can, someone who won't complicate things with inconvenient feelings. Thank you for giving me shelter when I had nothing. Thank you for defending me when I was humiliated. Those moments were real to me, even if they weren't for you. The divorce papers are with my lawyer. You can sign them whenever you wish. I won't ask for anything. I just want to be free. Take care. And maybe one day you'll learn that not everything in life can be controlled by contracts. Some feelings simply happen." Dakota. Kellan sat on her bed holding the letter, and for the first time in years he cried. Dakota spent that first night in a cheap hotel near the train station. She cried until there were no tears left. When she looked at her reflection in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. But something was different now. She was no longer the broken woman who had accepted that contract. No longer the rejected wife begging for scraps of affection. She was simply Dakota, and she needed to find out who that really was. The next morning, she bought a train ticket. Destination, Cambridge. She was going to start over. She was going back to school. She was going to build something that no one could take away from her. And as the train pulled away from London, away from Kellan, from the mansion, from everything she had known, over the past year, Dakota made herself a promise. She would never again be defined by someone else's love. She would never again wait to be saved. She would save herself. Back at the mansion, Kellan climbed to his office and stared out the window at the city. Maggie entered without knocking, something she never did. "She's gone." "Yes, and you let her go." She wanted to leave. Maggie shook her head, disappointed. You're a fool, Kellan Burke. That girl loved you, truly, loved you, and you pushed her away out of pride. It wasn't pride, it was fear, Maggie finished. Fear of getting hurt, fear of not being loved, fear of being happy, and now you'll have to live with it. She walked out, slamming the door behind her. Kellan looked down at the wedding ring on his finger, then at his blue eyes reflected in the glass, and he realized Maggie was right. He was a fool, and he had just lost the only real thing he had ever had in his life. Autumn arrived in Cambridge with cold winds and golden leaves covering the cobblestone streets. Dakota rented a tiny room in a boarding house run by Mrs. Julie, a 60-year-old widow with kind eyes and gray hair tied in a loose bun. "First rule here," Mrs. Julie said, showing her the small but tidy room. "No questions about the past. Second rule, rent's due on the 10th. Third rule, you look like someone who needs a fresh start, so start fresh." Dakota spent the first days simply existing. She walked through the old streets of Cambridge, watching students laugh in cafes, couples holding hands, lives being lived while hers still felt suspended. But one gray October afternoon, while leafing through a newspaper in a cafe that smelled of fresh bread and strong coffee, she saw an ad that made her heart skip a beat. University of Cambridge. Entrance exams open for second semester. Applications now accepted. Law. She was going to study law, because if the past year had taught her anything, it was that knowledge was power, and she needed power to never again be vulnerable, to never again depend on anyone. With the little money she had, Dakota bought used books from secondhand shops that smelled of dust and history. During the day, she worked at a small cafe near the university, serving coffee and sandwiches to students who seemed to have their whole lives ahead of them. At night, she studied until her eyes burned, until the words blurred on the page, until her body begged for rest she refused to grant. Mrs. Julie would often appear at her door with a tray of hot tea and homemade cookies. "You'll make it, dear. There's fire in your eyes." And there was fire, determination burning in every cell of Dakota's body, because every article of constitutional law she memorized, every legal precedent she understood, was another brick in the foundation of her freedom. While the trees in Cambridge shed their last leaves to winter, in London, Kellan couldn't sleep. He spent his nights in the office, working until exhaustion because it was the only way not to think. But it didn't work. Everything reminded him of her. The garden where they had rehearsed their kiss, the library where he'd seen her arranging books, the room she had occupied for a year and that now stood empty, frozen in time, a shrine to regret. On a cold November morning, 2 weeks after Dakota had left, Kellan called Lauren into his office. "I need you to hire the best private investigators in the country. Sir, find Dakota Lautner. I don't care what it costs. Find her." But Dakota had vanished. She didn't use credit cards. She had no social media. She left no trace. It was as if she had dissolved into thin air, like smoke carried away by the wind. Winter deepened. Snow covered Cambridge like a white blanket, muffling the city's sounds. Dakota took the entrance exam on a freezing January morning, her hands trembling not only from the cold, but from equal parts nerves and hope. Hours of testing, complex questions about constitutional, civil, and criminal law. But she had studied so much that the answers flowed naturally, as though they had always been there, waiting to be found. When she left the examination room, the sun was setting, tinting the snow in shades of orange and rose. For the first time in months, Dakota allowed herself to feel hope. In London, winter was merciless too. Kellan received weekly reports from the investigators, all saying the same thing. Nothing, no sign of her, no lead. "Mr. Burke," the lead investigator reported one especially cold afternoon, "there's absolutely nothing. If she doesn't want to be found, she won't be." Kellan dismissed the man with a generous payment, but he didn't give up. He hired more investigators, and more. He spent fortunes, sums that could have kept families comfortable for generations. He searched every corner of England, Wales, and Scotland. But Dakota remained invisible, a ghost haunting every one of his thoughts. At night, he would go to her room, sit on the bed that still held the faint scent of her perfume, something soft, floral. He would stare at the empty closet, the untouched vanity, and he would finally allow himself to feel the pain he'd suppressed during the day. "Where are you?" he would whisper into the emptiness, to the shadows dancing on the walls. "Please, just let me know you're all right." But silence was the only answer. Spring came slowly to Cambridge, thawing rivers and bringing bright yellow daffodils to the university gardens. It was that spring when Dakota saw her name printed in the newspaper, at the very top of the acceptance list. First, overall, Mrs. Julie came running into the cafe where Dakota worked, holding the newspaper as if it were made of gold. "Girl, you did it! First place!" Dakota took the paper with trembling hands. There it was, her name, at the top, first place among hundreds of candidates. She cried with relief, with pride, with a joy so pure it almost hurt. For the first time in so long, it was something entirely hers. No one had given it to her. No one had bought it. She had earned it. In London that same spring morning, Kellan read the newspaper as he did every day, obsessively scanning lists of university admissions, job openings, obituaries, anything that might contain her name. And then he saw it. Dakota Lautner. First overall, Law, University of Cambridge. His heart stopped, literally stopped for one beat before pounding back to life, crashing against his ribs. She was in Cambridge. She was alive. She was studying. She was shining. He reached for the phone, his fingers already dialing Lauren's number, ready to order a car to Cambridge. But he froze halfway through. What would he say? "I'm sorry I destroyed you, but now I want you back?" No. She deserved peace. She deserved to build her life, without him haunting her like a ghost from a past that refused to die. So Kellan did the only thing he could. He created an anonymous account and donated a large sum to a scholarship fund at the University of Cambridge, specifying that it be directed toward law students with exceptional performance and financial need. If he couldn't be near her, he would at least ensure she had everything she needed to succeed. Summer passed in a blur of lectures, study sessions, and work. Dakota had enrolled at the University of Cambridge and threw herself into her studies with a focus that even worried Mrs. Julie. "You need rest, dear. You can't live on coffee and determination." "I might just graduate that way," Dakota replied with a tired smile. Law school was challenging in ways she hadn't imagined. The classes were dense, the professors demanding, the competition fierce. But Dakota loved every minute. She loved the feeling of building something, of becoming someone. In the first few months, she was just another student among hundreds, quiet, focused, always in the front row, taking meticulous notes. But gradually, as autumn painted Cambridge in shades of gold again, the professors began to notice. Dakota Lautner, the civil law professor, called after a particularly complex lecture on contract law and vices of consent. "Your argument today was exceptional. The way you connected historical precedents to modern interpretations. Have you ever considered an academic career?" "I'm thinking of practicing law, Professor. I want to help people who don't have a voice." He smiled, his eyes gleaming with approval. "With that determination and that mind, you'll go far, very far." The second winter arrived gentler than the first. Dakota received a letter informing her that she had been granted a full scholarship, something that left her in genuine shock. When she asked the financial department about the criteria, they simply said it was for exceptional students with proven financial need. She never knew the money came from an account linked to Kellan Burke. But the nights were still hard. When Cambridge fell silent beneath blankets of snow and Dakota was alone in her small room, the pain returned like a tide that respected neither dams nor barriers. She would remember the garden, the kiss, his words echoing endlessly, "I would never lie with you." Sometimes she cried until she fell asleep. Sometimes she just stared at the cracked ceiling, wondering if he thought of her, if he regretted it, if he felt anything beyond relief that she was gone. But every morning she rose again, washed her face with cold water, tied up her hair, and went to class. Because thinking about Kellan changed nothing. That chapter was closed, sealed, buried beneath layers of pride and pain. In London, Kellan was no better. He worked 16, sometimes 17 hours a day, building empire upon empire, as if wealth could fill the void Dakota had left. He refused every social invitation, didn't go out with women, didn't look at anyone. The ex-lovers who tried to win him back were dismissed with cutting coldness. Lauren, his secretary, tried once, on a rainy afternoon in March. "Mr. Burke, there's a charity event on Friday. Mrs. Richardson asked if you'd be interested in accompanying her. It would be good for the company's image and—" "No, but sir, it would only be a few hours and the cause is—" "I said no, Lauren." His voice came out harsher than he intended, sharp as glass. He sighed, running a hand over his tired face. "I'm sorry. I'm just not interested. I never will be again." Lauren nodded, worried. Everyone in the office knew, though no one said it out loud. The boss had changed since his wife left. Colder, more distant, as if part of him had died that autumn night when she closed the door for the last time. The spring of her second year brought achievements Dakota had never imagined. She became the top student of the year. She received awards that piled up on a small shelf in her boarding room. Professors invited her to assist with research. Classmates asked for help with their studies. Dakota Lautner was becoming a respected name in the halls of Cambridge University. But there were still nights when she woke up dreaming of blue eyes and gentle hands that never touched her the way she wished they would. Nights when she wondered if she would ever be able to love again, or if Kellan had broken something in her that would never mend, like fine porcelain that, even when glued, still shows the cracks. Mrs. Julie, now with whiter hair and slower steps, sat with her on those difficult nights. "You still think about him, don't you?" Dakota didn't ask how Mrs. Julie knew. She just nodded, because lying required energy she didn't have. "Love doesn't die just because we want it to," Mrs. Julie said, her voice carrying the wisdom of someone who had lived and lost. "Sometimes we carry people in our hearts for a lifetime, even when they don't deserve to be there. The question isn't how to stop loving, it's how to live while still loving. How do you stop loving someone who destroyed you? You don't. You just learn to build something bigger than the destruction." In London, as the seasons turned in their eternal cycle, Kellan climbed to Dakota's room every night. Maggie had strict orders not to touch anything, to leave time frozen in that space like a museum of regret. And Kellan, though he never admitted it aloud, filled that closet with gifts she would never see. Dresses she would never wear, carefully chosen during business lunches when he passed store windows and saw something she would have liked. Books on law and literature that he bought compulsively. Delicate jewelry he imagined against her neck, her wrists, shining against the skin he would never touch again. It was his way of apologizing to the emptiness, his way of saying he missed her to someone who wasn't there to hear. "Why don't you go after her?" Maggie asked one night, finding him sitting in the empty room, holding an emerald green dress that would have matched the eyes he dreamed of every night. "Because she hates me, and she has every right to." "You don't know that." "Not for sure." "Yes, I do. I destroyed her," Maggie said the cruelest things I could say. "She built a new life without me. Who am I to ruin it again?" "You're the man who loves her. That should count for something." Kellan shook his head, his blue eyes dulled by pain. "If she truly loved me, she would have come back. Or maybe her pride won't let her." Maggie sat beside him on the bed, something she never did, crossing the line between servant and master. "You rejected her in the cruelest way possible, Kellan. You told her you'd never lie with her. For a woman in love, there are no words more. Devastating. Women don't forget that easily, some never do." The third year came and Dakota was stronger, more focused, more distant than before. She wrote articles for law journals that impressed even senior professors. She spoke at student conferences about women's rights and social justice with a passion that held entire audiences silent. She was recognized as one of the brightest minds of her generation, but she still slept alone, still woke up with his name on her lips. And involuntary whisper that shamed her. There were men who tried. Luck, a classmate with kind eyes and an easy smile, asked her out several times. She accepted once, truly trying. He was interesting, intelligent, gentle, but when he tried to kiss her at the end of the night, beneath a silver moon that witnessed her cowardice, she stepped back. She couldn't. It didn't feel right. It was like trying on someone else's clothes. No matter how much you adjusted, they just didn't fit. "You still love someone, don't you?" Luck asked, more sad than angry. "I'm sorry. You don't need to be. I just hope he's worthy of everything you still feel." "He isn't," Dakota thought as she walked back to the boarding house beneath indifferent stars. But my stubborn heart still hasn't understood that. The fourth year brought recognition that transcended the university. Dakota's thesis on women's rights in situations of legal vulnerability was being praised not only by professors but also by established lawyers and judges who read it and took notes, impressed by the depth and humanity of her analysis. She was already receiving job offers from major law firms. Elegant letters on embossed stationery arrived regularly, offering generous salaries and promises of a brilliant career. It was on a golden afternoon as the leaves began to fall again, marking 4 full years since she had left London, that Professor Fox called her into his office. "Dakota, I have a proposal for you that I believe you'll find interesting." He leaned forward, fingers interlaced over the polished mahogany desk. "My brother, Dr. Robert Fox, runs one of the largest and most prestigious law firms in London, Fox & Associates. He's looking for exceptionally talented young lawyers to join the team. I sent him your resume. He wants to meet you." Dakota felt her stomach twist violently. London. Kellan was in London. The city she had fled from was now calling her back, offering precisely what she had spent 4 years building herself up to achieve. I don't know if it's an extraordinary opportunity, Dakota, the kind that defines careers, but I understand if you have reservations. London is a big city, but for some people it can also feel far too small." Professor Fox looked at her with that unnerving perception good teachers develop, the ability to see more than words reveal. That night, Dakota lay awake on the narrow bed that knew every inch of her body after 4 years, wrestling with ghosts and possibilities. Returning to London meant risking seeing him. It meant reopening wounds she had spent 4 years trying to heal with study, work, and iron determination. But it also meant the best career opportunities in the country. It meant proving herself in the most competitive, demanding arena. It meant refusing to let Kellan Burke, even as a memory, dictate where she could or could not build her life. Pride versus fear, ambition versus safety. The future she deserved versus the past that haunted her. By morning, as the sun rose over Cambridge for the last time as her home, Dakota made her decision. She would not let the ghost of 4 years ago control her destiny. She had built this on her own. She had bled for every grade, every recognition, every line of her thesis. She had earned this with pain and perseverance, and she would not give up the career of her dreams because of a man who had rejected her in the cruelest way possible. "Professor Fox," she said when she found him that afternoon, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I accept the meeting with your brother. When can I go to London?" The professor smiled, satisfied. "Excellent decision, Dakota. I'll call Robert today and arrange the details. But first, you have a graduation to finish with distinction, don't you? Focus on these final weeks. London can wait a little longer." "Thank you, Professor, for everything. You built this yourself, Dakota. I only opened a door. You're the one walking through it." The final weeks before graduation passed in a whirlwind of exams, thesis defense, and preparations. Dakota threw herself into her studies with renewed intensity, knowing that every grade, every well-structured argument, every academic recognition would be her armor when she finally returned to London. Her thesis was defended one afternoon before a board of the most rigorous professors in the faculty. She argued for 2 hours, answering complex questions, citing precedents, connecting theory and practice in ways that impressed even the skeptics. When the board deliberated and returned with the highest score and glowing praise, Dakota allowed herself to smile, not just in relief but in genuine triumph. She was ready. London awaited. And this time, she wouldn't arrive as a runaway. She would arrive as a victory. In London, on a rainy afternoon that foreshadowed winter, Lauren entered Kellan's office with documents for him to sign. "Mr. Burke, the hearing for the Castellano Group merger is set for next Monday. Our attorneys are fully prepared." Kellan signed the papers without looking up. "Who's leading the defense on the other side?" "Dr. Robert Fox from Fox & Associates. He mentioned he has a newly hired attorney. Exceptionally talented, apparently. She just graduated from Cambridge with highest honors." Kellan only nodded, turning his attention back to the computer screen where numbers and contracts blurred into meaningless lines. Another hearing. Another day in the routine that had become his life for the past 4 years. Work, solitude, regret, repeating in endless cycles. He had no idea his world was about to be turned upside down again. Graduation took place on a cold, clear December morning. Dakota wore her cap and gown, holding the diploma that represented 4.5 years of hard work, sleepless nights, silent tears, and a determination she hadn't known she possessed. Mrs. Julie sat in the audience crying with pride as if Dakota were her own daughter. When Dakota's name was called as valedictorian, top of her class with the highest honors, the applause was long and well-deserved. She stepped to the podium, looked out at the sea of expectant faces, and spoke about new beginnings, about women who fall and rise again, about turning pain into purpose. She didn't mention Kellan, but every word carried the journey he had unwittingly forced her to take. "We are stronger than we think," she concluded, her voice echoing through the hall. "And sometimes the worst things that happen to us are exactly what we need to become who we were always meant to be." The audience rose in a standing ovation, and in that moment, holding her diploma, surrounded by applause, Dakota felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not complete happiness. The wound still ached, but something close to peace. The peace of knowing she had survived, that she had won, that Kellan Burke had not destroyed her, though he had tried. The following week, Dakota arrived in London. The city was covered in Christmas lights, festive, bustling, completely unaware that a woman who had left it broken 4 years earlier was returning transformed. She rented a small but dignified apartment in Bloomsbury, an intellectual neighborhood filled with bookshops and cafes. She bought professional suits that made her look exactly what she had become, a serious, competent lawyer. She wore her hair in an elegant bun that framed the face which had matured through the years. And when she looked in the mirror on the morning of her first meeting at Fox & Associates, she saw a lawyer, a professional, a survivor, a woman who owed nothing to anyone, especially not to the ghost of a love that had almost destroyed her. At Robert's office, she was received with the respectful formality reserved for exceptional talent. "Mrs. Lautner, it's an honor to have you with us. My brother sent me your thesis. I read it personally. Extraordinary work. Thank you, Dr. Fox. I'm eager to start contributing." "Excellent, because I have an important case waiting for you. It's a corporate client, a complex merger being contested. The hearing is on Monday. I need someone sharp, someone unafraid to face the big firms and their intimidating lawyers. I believe you're exactly what we need." He slid a thick folder across the desk. Dakota took it, opened it with steady professional hands, and her heart simply stopped. Burke Incorporations versus Castellano Holdings. The name was there, printed in letters that seemed to pulse on the page. Kellan Burke. After 4.5 years avoiding even thinking the name, there it was, materialized in black ink on white paper, waiting for her the way destiny always does. Patient. Inevitable. For a moment, just a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, Dakota considered refusing, saying she wasn't ready, that she needed more time, that any other case would be better. But then she remembered. She remembered his words in the garden, the rejection, the nights she cried alone, the hours spent studying until her eyes burned. She remembered everything she had built, alone, unaided, without him, and she lifted her chin. No. She wouldn't run. Not anymore. Never again. "I'll be ready." "On Monday," she said, and her voice didn't tremble in the slightest. Dr. Fox smiled approvingly. "Excellent. Welcome to Fox & Associates, Dr. Lautner." Over the weekend, Dakota studied the case with the same intensity that had become her trademark. Contracts, clauses, legal precedents. She built her argument piece by piece like an architect constructing a cathedral of logic and law. On Monday morning, Dakota woke up early. She put on her best suit, a dark gray one that exuded seriousness and competence. Her hair was pulled into an elegant bun, her makeup discreet yet flawless. When she looked in the mirror, she saw a lawyer, a professional, a woman who owed nothing to anyone. "You can do this," she told her reflection, her voice steady. "You can do this." The hearing would take place at the High Court of London, an imposing structure of marble and glass that intimidated even the most seasoned attorneys. Dakota arrived an hour early, reviewed her arguments for the 5th time, and arranged her documents in perfect order. Dr. Fox approached her, smiling with confidence. "Ready? Ready. Good. The opposing party just arrived. Let's greet them before we go in. Protocol, you know." Dakota followed him down the wide corridor, the sound of her heels echoing on the polished marble. A group of executives and lawyers stood near the courtroom, talking in low, confident tones. She recognized a few faces from business magazines, men in expensive suits carrying themselves with power and certainty. And then she saw him. Kellan Burke stood at the center of the group, immaculate in a navy blue suit that looked tailored for every inch of his frame. He was older, a few lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, but he still had that magnetic presence, that quiet dominance that made everyone around him seem smaller. Dakota felt as if someone had punched her in the stomach. The air left her lungs. For a moment, her legs threatened to give out, but she forced herself to stay composed. She was a professional. She could do this. "Good morning, gentlemen." Dr. Fox greeted the group, smiling. "Mrs. Lautner, allow me to introduce you." Kellan turned. Their eyes met, and the world stopped. Dakota saw the shock ripple across his face like a wave. She saw recognition, disbelief, and something deeper she couldn't quite name. Something that looked like pain. "Good morning," she said, her voice calm and professional, extending her hand as if they were complete strangers. "Dakota Lautner, attorney representing Castellano Holdings in this case." Kellan looked at her outstretched hand, then at her face. There were so many emotions flickering behind those blue eyes that it was like watching a storm. Surprise, confusion, hope, regret. Slowly he shook her hand. The touch was electric, even through the forced professionalism, like the 5 years between them had never passed. Like they were still in the garden, hovering on the edge of a kiss that had meant far more than it should have. "Mrs. Lautner," he finally said, his voice slightly hoarse, "it's a pleasure to meet you." Dakota almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Meet her, as if they were strangers, as if he hadn't seen her in a wedding dress, as if she hadn't fled from the ruins of her own life. Then she noticed. On Kellan's left hand, gold still gleamed faintly. He was still wearing the ring. 5 years, and he still wore the wedding band. Something inside her shifted, a feeling she shoved down with force. "Not now. Not here." "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Burke," she replied, releasing his hand before the contact lingered longer than appropriate. "I'll see you inside." And with that, she turned and walked into the courtroom, leaving Kellan standing in the hallway, visibly shaken. Dr. Fox followed her in, frowning. "You two know each other?" "No," Dakota lied smoothly, opening her briefcase and pretending to review documents. "I just recognized the name from the news." But as she arranged her papers on the defense table, her hands trembled slightly. 5 years. 5 years spent building a new life, a new identity. And in a single second, everything came rushing back. The humiliation, the pain, but also that inexplicable connection she had felt in the garden of the mansion, during the rehearsal before the wedding that should never have been. The door opened, and Kellan entered with his lawyers. He sat across the room, but his eyes never left Dakota. She could feel the weight of that gaze, even without looking up. The judge entered, and the hearing began. Dakota delivered her arguments with mastery. Every word was measured, every piece of evidence perfectly positioned. She dismantled the Burke Corporation's case piece by piece, with a relentless logic that left even the most experienced lawyers impressed. She cited precedents, exposed inconsistencies in the contracts, demonstrated with devastating clarity that the merger violated antitrust regulations. Her voice was steady, confident, unyielding. The judge seemed impressed, taking constant notes. Kellan's lawyers clearly hadn't expected to face someone so prepared, so brilliant. When Dakota finished her closing argument, silence filled the room. A heavy silence, charged with admiration and disbelief. Then the judge struck the gavel. "Case ruled in favor of Castellano Holdings. The merger is blocked until all irregularities are corrected." Dakota exhaled quietly. She had won her first major case, and not against just any company, but one of the largest in the country, against Burke Corporations, against him. Dr. Fox congratulated her enthusiastically, shaking her hand firmly. "Outstanding, Mrs. Lautner. Absolutely outstanding. You have a brilliant future in this firm." But when Dakota looked across the courtroom, Kellan didn't look angry or frustrated by the loss. He was smiling. A small, almost imperceptible smile, but it was there, and there was something in his eyes. Admiration, pride, as if he were seeing something he had always known was there but had never witnessed with his own eyes. As everyone left the room, Kellan approached. His lawyers were gone, and Dr. Fox had stepped out to take an urgent call. It was just the two of them, standing in the silent hallway, surrounded by cold marble and the soft light, streaming through tall windows. "Dakota," he said, and hearing her name on his lips after so long did something strange to her heart, something she didn't want to feel. "Mr. Burke," she replied, keeping her tone formal, professional, building a wall between them. "Did you do this on purpose? Taking a case against my company?" She lifted her chin, her gaze steady. "No, I was just doing my job." He took a step closer, and Dakota had to force herself not to step back. "You were credible. The way you argued in there, it was brilliant. You've always been brilliant, but now you're unstoppable. Thank you." The silence between them was dense, heavy with 5 years of unsaid words, unanswered questions, and regrets that weighed like stones. "Dakota, he began, but she cut him off, opening her purse and pulling out a business card. "If you'd like to discuss the terms of the merger or any other legal matter, you can contact me." Kellan took the card, his fingers brushing hers for a second that felt like forever. "And if I want to discuss other things?" Dakota met his gaze, her eyes now cold, a coldness she had learned to wear as armor. "Then I suggest you sign the divorce papers that are still pending, Mr. Burke. My assistant can collect them when they're ready." And with that, she turned and walked down the corridor, her heels echoing on the marble, her head held high, her shoulders squared, leaving Kellan alone, holding the business card as if it were the most precious thing in the world, as if it were the last thread connecting him to the woman who had haunted him for 5 long years. Kellan stood there for a long time after Dakota was gone. The card burned between his fingers. He looked down at the wedding band on his hand, then at the name printed on the card. Dakota Lautner, attorney, Fox & Associates. She had rebuilt her life on her own, without him, without anyone, and she had become exactly the kind of woman he had always known she could be. Strong, brilliant, unstoppable. That night, Kellan couldn't work. He sat in the office of the mansion, staring at the note she had left 5 years ago. He had kept it carefully folded in a locked drawer, as if it were a sacred relic. "You need someone who's your equal." He had laughed bitterly when he first read those words, because the truth was he had never met anyone who measured up to him like Dakota did. She had always, been stronger, braver, more real, and he had let her go. Maggie came in with tea as she had every night for the past 5 years. "Sir, may I speak freely?" "You always may, Maggie." The housekeeper sat in the chair across from his desk, something she rarely did. "I saw her today, on television, talking about the case. She looked beautiful, so confident." Kellan wasn't surprised that Maggie knew. The woman had always possessed a sixth sense for such things. "She did," he agreed, his voice low, thick with emotion. "And are you going to let her slip away again?" "She left me, Maggie. I didn't." "You let her go," Maggie interrupted, her tone firmer than he had ever heard it. "You stayed silent when you should have roared. She ran because you didn't love her back, not because she didn't belong in your world, but because you didn't fight for her." Her words cut deep because they were true, raw, merciless truth. "And now?" Kellan asked, his voice barely a whisper. "What do I do now?" Maggie stood, placing a hand on his shoulder in a gesture almost maternal. "Now, sir, you do what you should have done years ago. You fight for her." The next morning, Dakota arrived at the office to find a bouquet of flowers at reception. Not a typical arrangement. White lilies, her favorite. How did he know? There was a card. "Congratulations on yesterday's victory. You were brilliant. Again." Dakota felt her heartbeat quicken but pushed the flowers aside on her desk. She wasn't going to fall for that, not again. But the flowers kept coming. Every day a different bouquet. Always white lilies, always with a simple note. "Good morning. I hope your day is as extraordinary as you are." I still remember Santorini. That last one made her freeze. Santorini, the kiss that had been real. A week later, Dakota was reviewing contracts when her secretary entered, holding a box from an expensive coffee shop. "For you, Dr. Lautner." The delivery man said it's courtesy of a satisfied client. Dakota opened the box. Inside was a perfect coffee, exactly the way she liked it. Cappuccino with extra cinnamon and a still warm almond croissant. There was another note. "I remember you liked coffee in the morning. I hope this brightens your day." She should have thrown it away, should have written a formal email asking him to stop, but instead she took a sip of the coffee and closed her eyes, savoring. It was exactly the way she liked it. 2 weeks passed. Kellan never appeared in person, but his presence was everywhere, in every gesture, every detail. Books she had once mentioned wanting to read arrived wrapped in elegant paper. Invitations to dinner followed, always under the pretext of discussing legal matters. Dakota declined them all, but doubt began to creep in. Why? Why was he doing this? Then, on a Thursday night, just as she was about to leave the office, the phone rang. "Dr. Lautner?" It was Maggie. Dakota recognized the voice instantly and something in her chest tightened. "Maggie, is everything all right?" "Yes, dear, but I need to talk to you. In person if possible. It's about Mr. Burke." 30 minutes later, Dakota was sitting in a quiet cafe in Covent Garden across from Maggie. The housekeeper looked older, but her eyes still held that same kind, gentle light, warm and familiar. "You look beautiful, my girl," Maggie said, taking Dakota's hands across the table. "So strong, so you." "Maggie, what's going on? Is Kellan all right?" "Physically, yes." Maggie sighed, squeezing her hands. "But he's never been the same since you left. He stopped living, Dakota. All he does is work. He doesn't go out, doesn't smile. He doesn't exist anymore. That's not my fault." "It's not," Maggie agreed immediately. "It's his, for not fighting for what he felt for you, for letting you go. But he's changed, dear. No woman has stepped into that house in 5 years. He still wears the ring. Your room is untouched but full of gifts he's bought, waiting for you to come back." Dakota felt her eyes sting. "Why? Why are you telling me this?" "Because he never will. He's too proud, or maybe too afraid. But you need to know." Maggie leaned forward, her eyes shining with tears she refused to let fall. "He loves you, Dakota. He always has. He just realized it too late." That night, Dakota couldn't sleep. Maggie's words echoed in her mind, like a bell that refused to stop ringing. "He loves you. He always has. How could someone love another person and reject them so cruelly?" But then she remembered the way he had looked at her in the garden, as if seeing something precious and terrifying all at once. The rehearsal kiss that had felt far too real. The moment during the wedding reception when he had finally defended her. Too late, but with a ferocity that had shocked everyone. On Friday morning, Dakota made a decision. She picked up the phone and dialed the number Kellan had left on the card weeks earlier. He answered on the second ring, his voice tense, as though he'd been waiting. "Dakota, we need to talk about the divorce." There was a long pause, heavy, loaded. "Of course, when?" "Today, 6 p.m., your office. I'll be waiting." At exactly 6 o'clock, Dakota walked into Burke Corporations for the first time. The building was a skyscraper of glass and steel in the heart of London. Imposing, intimidating, a monument to Kellan's success. Lauren, the secretary, led her to the top floor where the president's office was located. When the door opened, Dakota saw Kellan standing by the window, looking out at the city that stretched below him like a kingdom. He turned as she entered. He wasn't wearing his jacket. The sleeves of his white shirt were rolled to his elbows, his tie loosened. He looked tired, but there was a light in his eyes when he saw her. "You came. I said I would." Dakota placed the folder on his desk, her movements precise, professional. "I brought the divorce papers. They're ready. All that's missing is your signature." Kellan approached the desk but didn't pick up the papers. Instead, he looked at her, really looked at her, the way he had that first morning 5 years ago. "May I ask you something first?" "You may. Why are you so eager to get rid of me?" The question hit her like a punch she hadn't seen coming. "What do you mean?" 5 years, Dakota. 5 years when you could have filed for a contentious divorce, forced the legal process, ended it quickly. But you didn't. You waited. Until now. He took another step closer, close enough that she could feel his warmth. "Why?" She looked away, her armor beginning to crack. Because I was busy building my life. The divorce wasn't a priority. Liar. His voice was soft but firm. You're a lawyer. You know it could have been settled in months. So why did you wait until you saw me again? Dakota felt her defenses crumble piece by piece. I don't know. I do. Kellan was so close now that she could see the tiny golden flecks in his blue eyes. Because part of you wanted to see me. You wanted to know if I'd changed, if I regretted it. And do you? The words escaped before she could stop them. Raw, exposed. Every day. His voice broke slightly, and there was a pain so unguarded in it that Dakota felt it deep in her chest. Every damn day for the past 5 years, I've regretted staying silent. Regretted hurting you that way. Regretted being a coward when I should have given myself to you. Tears threatened, but Dakota held them back. She couldn't let herself fall apart. Why did you reject me, Kellan? Why did you say those awful things? Her voice trembled, carrying 5 years of pain. Why couldn't you just love me? Because I was an idiot. He ran a hand through his hair. Frustration and desperation in every movement. I spent my whole life building walls, protecting myself. And in that moment when you offered me something real, something true, I got scared. Scared I wasn't enough. Scared that you'd leave me when the contract ended anyway. So I pushed you away first. He took a step closer, his blue eyes bright with unshed tears. I chose fear over you. I chose wrong. And I lost you. Lost the only real thing I ever had. The silence between them was heavy, filled with pain and regret. Do you have someone? Kellan asked suddenly, jealousy unmistakable in his tone. Is that why you want the divorce? Is there another man? No. Then what am I? Too old? Too unattractive? Dakota almost laughed at the absurdity. You know that's not it. Then why are you so determined to cut me out? Because. She took a deep breath, summoning courage from somewhere deep inside. Because it's easier to end it now, before I make the mistake of believing. Again that it could have been real. Kellan's blue eyes widened. It could be real. It can be real, Dakota, if you'd give me a chance. For what? To be humiliated again? To find out I'm just another convenient piece in your game? You were never just a piece. His voice rose, passionate, raw. From the first day you walked into my office with that coffee, something in me shifted. You looked at me and didn't see the money, or the company, or the name. You saw me, and it terrified me. Terrified me so much that I tried to keep you at a distance, to keep everything professional and safe. He took her hands, ignoring her attempt to pull away. But that kiss in Santorini, that was real. The need to protect you, to see you smile, to know you beyond the contract, all of it was real. And when you left, when I read that note, it felt like someone had ripped a piece of me out. Kellan, let me finish, please. He lifted her hands and pressed gentle, reverent kisses to her. Knuckles, I looked for you for months, spent fortunes on investigators, but you had vanished. And I realized that's exactly what I deserved. So I stopped searching until I saw your name in the paper, on the list of Cambridge graduates. You deserved to rebuild your life. But I never stopped waiting, never took off the ring because to me, I'm still your husband. I still want to be. Dakota felt the tears finally fall, hot, unrestrained, releasing 5 years of buried pain. How can I trust you? How do I know you won't disappoint me again? You don't. The honesty in his voice was brutal, but it was real. I can't promise perfection, but I can promise I'll try, that I'll fight, that I'll do everything right this time. But the truth is, I'm human. I'll make mistakes. Still, I promise you one thing. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently brushing away her tears, tenderness contrasting the fierce emotion in his eyes. I'll never push you away again. When I'm afraid, I'll never choose cowardice over you. I'll never lie about what I feel because I'm scared to be vulnerable. His voice broke, raw with emotion. Because you, Dakota Lautner, are the only real thing I've ever had. The only person who's ever seen me beyond the money, the company, the name. And I was too foolish, too afraid to recognize that when I had you in my arms. She looked at him, into those blue eyes full of sincerity, pain, and hope. And something inside her gave way. Sign the papers. His face fell. What? Sign them. Read them first, but then sign. With trembling hands, Kellan picked up the documents and began to read. Dakota watched as he turned each page. Then he stopped, frowned, reread an entire section. "You're not asking for anything," he said, incredulous. "Not a cent. No property. Nothing. I don't want your money, Kellan. I never did." He looked at her with an expression that was a blend of admiration and something deeper, something that looked a lot like love. "Why? Because everything I built on my own, and no one can take that from me." Kellan stood, walked over to her and picked up a pen, but instead of signing, he set it back down on the desk. "I'm not signing." "What? But you said—" "I said I regretted everything. I said I wanted a chance, and signing these papers would mean giving up on you all over again." He cupped her face in his hands, his eyes locked on hers. "Work? For me? What? You've beaten my company in court twice. A few more cases like that and I'll be bankrupt." There was a hint of humor in his voice now, but also sincerity. "I need you by my side, as legal counsel, as a partner." "Kellan, I can't." "You can, on one condition. I'll sign the divorce papers today, right now." Dakota frowned, confused. "But you just said—" "Because I want to do things right this time." He smiled, and it was the first genuine smile she had seen from him in years. "I want to know you for real, to win you for real. No contracts, no lies, no pressure, just us. Two people trying to figure out if what we feel is real." Her heart pounded. "And if it doesn't work? Then at least we'll have tried. At least we'll have been honest." He leaned forward until his forehead touched hers, eyes closed. "Give me this chance, Dakota. Let me prove I've changed. That you're not just the most incredible woman I've ever met, but the only one I want." She should have said no, should have protected the heart that had taken so long to rebuild. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw truth. She saw remorse. She saw love. "All right," she whispered. "One chance." And there, in his office, with the divorce papers forgotten on the desk, Kellan kissed Dakota. It was different from the kisses they had shared before. There was no audience to impress, no contract to fulfill. It was just them, two broken hearts finding their way back to each other. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. "Come with me," Kellan said. "Where?" "There's somewhere I need to show you." Half an hour later, they were at the mansion. Dakota felt her stomach twist as the doors opened. So many memories, good and bad, still lived within those walls. Maggie stood in the entryway, and when she saw Dakota, tears streamed down her lined face. "Welcome home, my girl." Kellan guided Dakota up the staircase to the second floor and stopped in front of a door she recognized instantly. Her old room. "May I?" he asked, his hand on the doorknob. She nodded. When the door opened, Dakota gasped. The room was exactly as she had left it. The bed, the furniture, even the little vase on the windowsill. But the closet was overflowing. Dresses, coats, shoes, books, jewelry, years of gifts. "All of this is yours," Kellan said softly behind her. "It always was. Every time I saw something and thought you'd like it, I bought it, as if somehow it could bring you back." Dakota stepped into the closet, her fingers brushing over expensive fabrics, dresses of every style, books on law and literature, delicate jewelry. Then she noticed something, a small blue velvet box hidden in the back. With trembling hands, she opened it. Inside was a ring, not the simple wedding band she had worn for a year, but an engagement ring, an emerald surrounded by diamonds. "No," Kellan said gently beside her, correcting her unspoken thought. "Green like hope, like new beginnings, like the color I saw in your eyes that first day you walked into my office and changed my life without even knowing it." He took the box, holding it between them like a promise. "It's an emerald because they're rare, strong. They endure intense pressure and become even more beautiful. Like you." She looked at him, tears streaming freely now, a smile breaking through her pain. "How do you expect me to resist?" "That? I don't," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I've spent 5 years learning that I don't want to resist you. I want to surrender, to love you, to give myself to what we have." He took her hands, intertwining their fingers as if he never wanted to let go. "I want you to believe that this time it's real, that it's not about contracts or fear or cowardice. It's just love, pure, imperfect, terrifying, but true." He took the ring, knelt right there in the room. "Dakota Lautner, I ruined everything once. I let you go when I should have fought for you. I stayed silent when I should have roared, but I won't make the same mistakes again. I'm not asking you to marry me today. I won't rush you, but one day, when you trust me again, when you believe this is real, may I ask you that question?" Dakota let out a shaky laugh, tears mixing with her smile. "You're ridiculous. So, is that a yes?" "It's a maybe. Ask me again when you've earned the answer." Kellan laughed, a genuine light sound full of hope. He stood, carefully closing the box. "Then I'll spend every day earning it." That night, they didn't make love. Instead, they sat in the mansion's garden, where everything had once begun, and simply talked. He told her about the last 5 years, about how the company had grown, yet he'd felt empty. She told him about law school, about the struggles, about how she'd found herself through her studies, and slowly, they began to truly know each other. Not as boss and employee, not as husband and wife by contract, but as two people, two souls trying to find their way back home. The months that followed were unlike anything Dakota had imagined. Kellan kept his word. He won her back, day by day. She accepted the position as senior legal counsel at Burke Corporations, but kept her own apartment. She didn't move back into the mansion despite his constant invitations. "I need my own space," she explained one morning. "I understand," Kellan replied, and there was genuine respect in his voice. But he never stopped being present. He brought her coffee every morning, cappuccino with extra cinnamon, left funny notes in her reports, invited her to dinners that began as business meetings and ended with laughter and personal stories. One night, 6 weeks after their reunion, Kellan took her to a quiet restaurant far from the gaze of London's elite. "Why here?" Dakota asked, glancing around. It was simple, familiar, unglamorous. "Because I don't want to impress you with money. I want you to like me, just me." And she did, more and more with each passing day. 3 months after their reunion, on a Friday night, Dakota was still at the office when Kellan showed up holding 2 bags of Chinese food. "I thought you might be hungry," she smiled, tired but happy. "You're getting to know me too well." They ate right there on her office floor, surrounded by files and documents. It was surprisingly intimate, relaxed, real. "Can I ask you something?" Kellan said, fiddling with his chopsticks. "You can. Why law? Why not go back to business administration?" Dakota was quiet for a moment. "Because for years I was powerless. My father died, and I couldn't do anything. Rachel stole my inheritance, and I had no way to fight back. I was humiliated and didn't know how to defend myself." She looked at him, her eyes bright with conviction. "Law gave me power, the ability to fight, to never be a victim again." Kellan reached out and intertwined his fingers with hers. "You were never a victim, Dakota. Even when life trampled you, there was fire in you. I saw it from the very first day." That night, they kissed for real. For the first time since their reunion. There was no audience, no expectation, just 2 hearts finding their way back to each other. The kiss was slow, deep, charged with months of restraint and years of longing. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "Come home with me," Kellan whispered against her lips. "Kellan, not like that. Not yet, if you don't want to. Just stay with me." Dakota looked into his eyes and saw vulnerability. She saw the man behind the billionaire. "All right." At the mansion, Maggie greeted them with a knowing smile. "Good evening, Mr. Burke, Dr. Lautner." Kellan led Dakota not to her old room, but to his. It was spacious, masculine, with an incredible view of the, city. "I have some of your things here," he said, opening a drawer, "in case you ever came back." She picked up one of his shirts. "I'll wear this." They lay down together, her body tucked safely against his. They didn't make love, just stayed there, talking in the dark. He told her about dreams he'd had of her. She admitted she had dreamed too. "I thought about you," she whispered. "Even when I tried not to. I never tried to forget," he murmured, kissing the top of her head. "I didn't want to." They fell asleep like that, entwined, and for the first time in 5 years, both slept without nightmares. A week later, Kellan hosted a formal dinner at the mansion. The same guests who had witnessed Dakota's humiliation years before were there again, but this time everything would be different. Dakota descended the grand staircase, radiant in an emerald gown that made everyone stop and stare. Kellan took her hand, firmly. There would be no more silence. In the middle of the dinner, he stood and finally spoke the truth before them all. He admitted his mistakes, praised Dakota's strength and brilliance, and declared that she had always been his equal. Then he walked over to her, knelt, and asked her to marry him. For real, out of love. Dakota smiled and said that now, yes, he finally deserved the answer he'd been waiting for. The room erupted in applause when she said, yes. Rachel tried to lash out, but Dakota met her with calm authority. Kellan ordered that the guilty women be removed and confirmed they would face justice for everything they had stolen. At last, justice was served. After the guests left, Kellan and Dakota stayed in the garden. He spoke of the future, not the past. He asked her to marry him soon. She laughed, tears glimmering in her eyes, and agreed. 5 years had been long enough to wait. 3 months later, in a quiet chapel in the Cotswolds, they were married. A small, intimate, perfect ceremony. Their vows were personal, born of truth and healing. Their kiss sealed the new life they were building together. That night, they gave themselves to each other completely, with mature, unhurried love, soft touches, tangled smiles, tenderness that said everything words could not. No fear, no secrets, just love. The next morning, Dakota woke in Kellan's arms. When he whispered, "Good morning, Mrs. Burke," she felt for the first time that she was truly home. Months later, with Rachel convicted and her inheritance restored, Dakota turned her past into purpose. She founded an organization to help women rebuild their lives. Kellan learned to balance work and living. They traveled, laughed, lived. One sunny afternoon in the mansion's garden, Dakota took his hand and placed it gently on her belly. The light in her eyes said everything. They were expecting a baby. Kellan lifted her off the ground in pure joy, among the same flowers that had once witnessed pain and rebirth. They celebrated the love they had fought for and won. They had been broken. They had fallen. They had started again. They had chosen each other once more, and that made them invincible. Happily ever after, for real this time. 18 months after the wedding, Dakota gave birth to a baby girl. They named her Grace, after the grace life had finally granted them after so much pain. Kellan cried when he held her for the first time. This man who had spent his life building financial empires was undone by 7 pounds of humanity wrapped in a pink blanket. "She has your eyes," he whispered in awe. "And your stubbornness, I'm sure," Dakota replied, exhausted but radiant. The first years were a whirlwind of sleepless nights, diapers, first steps, and first words. Dakota returned to work 6 months later, but under a new arrangement, 3 days at the office, the rest from home. Kellan did the same, shocking the corporate world. The ruthless Kellan Burke, leaving meetings early to be home for dinner, turning down international trips that would keep him away for more than 3 days. "I spent too many years building things that didn't matter," he told a journalist who questioned the change. "I'm not going to lose the years that truly do." When Grace turned 3, Dakota discovered she was pregnant again. Twins this time, a boy and a girl, Jacob and Lillian. The mansion that had once been silent and empty now echoed with laughter, cries, and the sound of little feet running across marble floors. Maggie, now 70, insisted on helping with the children, saying they kept her young. "They're the joy this house always needed," she said, rocking Lillian in her arms while Jacob tugged on her skirt asking for cookies. Dakota balanced motherhood and her career in a way she never thought possible. Her foundation had grown, helping hundreds of women rebuild their lives. She lectured at universities, wrote articles for legal journals, but always came home to tuck her children into bed. Kellan often found her sitting in the children's room at night, just watching them sleep. "What are you thinking?" he would ask, wrapping his arms around her. "That I almost lost all this. That I almost let fear steal this happiness." The years turned like pages in a book. Grace entered school and proved to be as brilliant as her mother, as determined as her father. Jacob was quiet, contemplative. He loved books and music. Lillian was pure fire, fearless, always the first to climb the tallest trees in the garden, always coming back with scraped knees and a wide grin. "She's you," Kellan said one afternoon, watching Lillian challenge her siblings to a race. "She doesn't accept limits. She's afraid of nothing." "She's us," Dakota corrected, intertwining her fingers with his. the best of both of us. When the children were 10, 7, and 7, Dakota and Kellan renewed their vows, not because they needed to, but because they wanted to, in the same chapel in the Cotswolds where they had married for real, surrounded by their children, by Maggie and by Mrs. Julie, now 80, but determined to attend. 10 years ago, I promised to love you, Kellan said, holding Dakota's hands, his blue eyes still as intense as the first day. And every day since, I've fallen more in love with you. Every gray hair, every wrinkle, every hard moment, every victory, every sleepless night with a sick child, every morning waking beside you, each one made me love you more. Dakota cried, as she always did when he spoke that way. You saved me, she said, voice trembling, not from the world, but from myself, from believing I didn't deserve to be loved. You taught me I'm enough, that I always was. Their children applauded, and Grace shouted, "Kiss already," making everyone laugh. The teenage years brought their share of challenges. Grace, ever the perfectionist, put too much pressure on herself. Jacob found his identity in music, spending hours at the piano Kellan had bought, creating melodies that made Dakota cry. Lillian threw herself into activism, organizing protests at school and fighting for causes she believed in. Where does she get that from? Kellan asked, half exasperated, half proud. From you, Dakota answered. The stubbornness is all yours. There were arguments, slammed doors, tears, and reconciliations. There were nights when Dakota and Kellan lay awake, worried, wondering if they were doing it right. But they always talked. They were always present. And they always made sure their children knew they were loved unconditionally. When Grace turned 18, she was accepted to Cambridge to study law. Dakota cried the day they dropped her off. My baby, she whispered, hugging her daughter in the small dorm room full of possibility. You're going to shine. Here, I learned from the best, Grace said, and there was so much love in her eyes that Dakota thought her heart might burst. Jacob went to a music academy in London at 16, a piano prodigy already being courted by orchestras. Lillian, from an early age, knew she wanted to be a doctor. I'm going to work with Doctors Without Borders, she announced at dinner. I'll help people no one else helps. Kellan looked across the table at Dakota, and they both smiled. Their children had purpose, passion, kindness. They had done something right. Their 50s arrived gently. Dakota now had a few silver strands in her brown hair. Kellan had lines around his eyes, marks from decades of smiling. They sold Burke Incorporations when Kellan turned 55, passing the company to trusted managers and keeping only a minority share. I want to travel with you, he told Dakota. I want to see the world, not from luxury hotels for business meetings, but for real. Backpack on if you're willing. And they traveled to small villages in Tuscany where they ate fresh bread and drank local wine, to deserted beaches in Greece where they swam at sunset, to ancient temples in Asia where they meditated in silence, to colorful markets in Africa where they bought handmade crafts and listened to stories. Maggie, now 85, stayed at the mansion, still strong, still caring for the house as she always had. Go live, she told them when they left. You've earned it. Grace married at 28 to a kind lawyer named Thomas who made her laugh. Dakota cried through the entire ceremony, remembering her own wedding, remembering how close she had come to losing everything. Kellan held her hand the whole time. Jacob performed in concerts around the world, but always came home. Lillian graduated from medical school and, true to her word, joined Doctors Without Borders, working in conflict zones, saving lives. When Dakota was 55, Grace gave her their first grandchild, a boy they named George after the grandfather Dakota had lost so long ago. Dakota held that baby and wept like she hadn't in years. My father would have loved to meet him, she whispered. He knows, Kellan said, wrapping his arms around her. Somehow he knows. Grandchildren followed one after another. Jacob had twin daughters who inherited his musical talent. Lillian adopted a little girl from Sudan while working there, a 5-year-old who stole her heart. The mansion that had once symbolized loneliness for Kellan became the heart of a loud, joyful family. Christmases with presents scattered everywhere, birthdays with enormous cakes, summer vacations with children running through the gardens. shouting and laughing. Dakota and Kellan, now in their 60s, sat on the veranda and watched. "Can you believe this?" she asked, her head resting on his shoulder. "Believe what?" "All of it. How we got here. How that scared Ice. Girl scrubbing floors became this." He kissed the top of her head. "You were always this, Dakota. You just needed time to bloom." Mrs. Julie passed away at 92, peacefully in her sleep. Dakota was by her side in her final days, holding her hand and telling stories. "You saved me," Dakota whispered. "When I had nothing, you gave me a place. You gave me hope." Mrs. Julie smiled, her eyes already distant. "You saved yourself, dear. I just held the door open." The funeral was small but filled with love. Dakota cried every tear she had, but she also smiled, grateful to have had that woman in her life. Maggie left them at 90, surrounded by the family she had loved as her own. "Take care of each other," were her last words. "Love deeply. Live without regret." Dakota and Kellan held her hands as she slipped away, and when the final breath came, both wept. "She brought us together," Dakota said through her sobs. She knew from the very beginning that we were meant for each other. Their 70s arrived with more white hair, more wrinkles, more aching joints, but also with more wisdom, more patience, more gratitude. Dakota had retired from active law practice at 65, yet she still wrote and occasionally lectured. Her foundation thrived, now led by Grace, who had followed in her mother's footsteps with fierce passion. Kellan spent his days reading, gardening, teaching his grandchildren to play chess. Who would have thought, he mused one afternoon, that the ruthless billionaire would become the grandpa who grows roses? Dakota laughed, that laugh he loved so much. "Life has a strange sense of humor." "It does," he agreed, pulling her closer on the garden swing. "But I wouldn't change a thing, not even the bad parts, especially the bad parts, because they brought us here." When Dakota was 78 and Kellan 82, they celebrated 50 years of marriage. Not the fake one, but the real one. The entire family was there. 3 children, 8 grandchildren. 2 great-grandchildren Grace had recently given birth to. The chapel was full, and when Dakota entered, supported by Grace on one side and Lillian on the other, everyone rose and applauded. Kellan stood at the altar, his back slightly bent with age, but his blue eyes still bright, still full of love. Dakota reached him, and he took her hands now marked with age spots and fine veins, yet still perfectly shaped to fit his. 50 years, he said, voice trembling but clear. "And if I had 50 more, I'd choose you again, every day, forever." Dakota cried, because even after everything, he could still make her heart race. "You were my miracle," she said softly. "My second chance, my whole life." They renewed their vows for the 3rd time, but this time with the wisdom of decades, with the certainty of 2 souls who knew every scar, every joy, every sorrow of the other, and still chose to stay. The final years were quiet, gentle. They spent their days at the mansion surrounded by family photos and memories hanging on the walls. Kellan struggled to walk now, a cane always nearby. Dakota had arthritis in her hands, could no longer write for long periods, but they had each other. Every afternoon they sat in the garden, the same place where they had once rehearsed that first kiss so many years ago. "Do you remember?" Dakota would ask. "The garden? The, wedding dress I wore when I ran away?" Kellan laughed, his voice raspier with age. "I remember everything, every second, every breath." "Was it worth it?" she asked, resting her head on his shoulder. "All the pain? All the struggle?" "Every second," he replied, kissing the top of her head. "Because it led me to you." Kellan went first, at 89, peacefully, in his sleep, with Dakota beside him. She woke and knew instantly. She took his hand, still warm, and didn't cry. Not yet. She only whispered, "I'll see you soon, my love, wait for me." The funeral was vast. Businessmen he had helped, women from Dakota's foundation, friends of decades, but mostly family. So many faces carrying pieces of Kellan within them. Dakota read a poem at the service, her voice surprisingly steady. He was a man who learned to love late in life, but when he did, he loved completely. And that love built a legacy that will live on for generations. She returned to the mansion, now far too quiet, and sat in the garden. Grace, Jacob, and Lillian joined her. "He loved you so much," Grace whispered. I know, Dakota said, smiling through tears. And I was lucky enough to love him back. Dakota lived 3 more years without him. Years in which she still went to the garden every afternoon, sat on the same bench and spoke to him as if he were still there. The great-grandkids are growing so fast, she would say to the wind. You'd be so proud. Her family visited, constantly, worried, but she always smiled. I'm fine, just waiting. Waiting for what, Grandma? Her youngest great-grandson once asked. To go home, she answered simply. One bright spring afternoon, with the garden in bloom and birds singing, Dakota sat on the bench for the last time. Grace found her hours later, peaceful, a soft smile on her lips, her hand outstretched as if holding someone's. Beside her on the bench was Kellan's wedding ring, the one she had carried in her pocket since the day he passed. At Dakota's funeral, the chapel was just as full as it had been for Kellan's. But this time, it wasn't sadness. It was celebration. A celebration of a life fully lived, of a woman who had fallen, risen, loved, lost, and loved again. Grace read her mother's final words, found in her diary. If I could go back to that night when I ran away in a wedding dress, I would do it all over again, because every tear, every humiliation, every moment of pain shaped the woman I needed to become, and that woman was strong enough to give love a second chance, to believe that people can change, to forgive, to begin again. I lived 2 lives. In the first, I was a victim. In the second, I was a survivor. And in the end, I was loved. Truly, deeply, eternally loved. And that was worth every second. Years later, when Dakota and Kellan's great-grandchildren ran through the gardens of the mansion, now cared for by Grace and her family, they would stop at the bench where their grandparents once sat. There was a plaque there now, simple, elegant. Here, 2 lost souls found their way to each other and proved it is never too late to begin again. That true love is worth the wait, and that the best stories are the ones brave enough to have a second chapter. And when the wind passed through the rose bushes Kellan had planted decades earlier, the great-grandchildren swore they could hear laughter, the laughter of 2 people who, even in eternity, were still together, still in love, still finally and forever home. Some stories do not end. They echo through generations, reminding us that true love, the kind that survives pain, time, pride, that love never dies. It becomes a legacy, a memory, an inspiration for everyone who comes after. Dakota and Kellan were not perfect. They were real. And in the end, that was more than enough. If you enjoyed this story, leave your like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances. Because sometimes, the truest love is the one brave enough to begin again.